Hello learners, and welcome to this session on the future of libraries. Well, before we talk about future of libraries, let us first talk about future. But future is a relative term. When I say relative term, it is related to the present, it is related to the past, and when we talk about future, it is also about how far into the future that one is talking about. Tomorrow, if you talk about tomorrow, we are talking about the future. If you talk about 1 week from now, we are talking about the future. If you are talking about a decade from now, it's still future. And talking about 100 years from now, it is very far into the future. So when we are talking about future of libraries, or basically future of anything, it's very unlikely that we can precisely predict what the future is going to be. We can forecast certain trends, and we can imagine what the future is likely to be, as we have seen with many fiction, science fiction, where we talk about, or where we have many movies that kind of visualize and show us how the future would be. We talk about a future society or future transportation and such things. But then the current state of things can also indicate, as I said, what or how future will be. So when we talk about libraries, we know how libraries have been in the past. Centuries ago, we know that libraries that existed then, for example, contained clay tablets as sources of information, or they were clay tablets were a means of information storage, or there were other such information storage media. But today, the libraries that we know of have a different kind of storage medium, the print-based storage medium, the books that all of us are familiar with. So there has been an evolution that has happened. In the past, the information was in one particular format, that has now, the storage of information has evolved into another format. And one of the most driving factor of change in not just libraries, but in many other sectors, many other areas, in fact in our day-to-day lives, have been, as you would have expected, is technology. So technology has been causing revolutionary changes, has been causing disruptive changes in many areas. We have seen this in businesses, in commerce, even in education, hospitality, healthcare. You talk about any sector, we see that technology has immensely impacted, greatly influenced how services are being rendered, how the content delivery is being done, and how our communication has hugely undergone a change. So one of the most redefining technologies in libraries have been the information and communication technologies, and today it is the internet that we know has reshaped libraries. In fact, in the last 2 or 3 decades, the libraries have undergone sweeping changes. We have discussed in courses, in other courses. In fact, I have given some talks in this course on digital libraries, on virtual libraries. So these libraries, the digital libraries, and virtual libraries have evolved from the print-based or the traditional libraries. And we all know that the change factor has largely been the information and communication technologies that have evolved, caused the evolutionary change from the so-called traditional to the digital or the virtual libraries of today. So there are trends. So once we talk about virtual libraries, what we know is these virtual libraries, we are talking about libraries that can be accessed from anywhere by anyone, and with information that is stored is in a variety of format. So today's trends are indicators or predictors of the future. So when we have understood that the modern day libraries that are undergoing change and evolving into traditional, the virtual and digital libraries, and these libraries, the virtual and digital libraries, have attributes or characteristics that are very distinctive from the traditional libraries. But then the underlying or the common factor of all these different types of libraries is, of course, that libraries are providers of information and knowledge, irrespective of the format or the kind of library that it is. The libraries have endeavored to provide access to information and knowledge. It is the ways and means that have undergone a change. So the technological environment, and as we know, libraries have been very good at adopting technologies. What the various technologies that have been evolved have been adopted by libraries, and today we see books evolving into electronic books, and there is an increased digital content in the libraries. And if we talk about something like say 50 years from now, because again when we talk about, as I said in the very beginning, we can talk about the future in terms of number of years. So if we are going to say that how are libraries, the future of libraries in 2 years or 3 years, we wouldn't expect a phenomenal change. There will be changes. These changes are incremental changes. But then if we are going to imagine a library 50 years from now or say 100 years from now, it is going to be completely different. So libraries, as the trend is, they are poised to become a space. It's kind of going to be an all-in-one space for learning. Learning has been happening. Consuming of information has been happening. But apart from these two, learning and consuming, what we are also going to see is that libraries are going to be spaces where there would be lot more sharing of information, creating of information by the consumers or users, and also providing an experience. Today we talk about libraries as places for experiences. So someone comes there, it's not just consuming information, but also, as I said, generating information or creating information, sharing information, and so on and so forth. We see insights of that already happening in libraries. For example, other than books or other than information sources in the libraries, be it digital form or the print form, we see equipments such as 3D printers and also places or spaces in the libraries called maker spaces. You might have already heard of these in other courses, or you might have read about it, but many libraries are increasingly creating spaces where the users, where the students can come and actually create things using their hands, using the various tools available in the libraries. For example, using 3D printers, create models, create equipments or not or models using pieces of construction material. When I say construction material, we can imagine it as pieces of jigsaw puzzles, only that you need to create stuff out of it. So it can be electronic components, it can be parts, it can be various things out of which creatively the users come and make things, or it can be using computers that have specialized softwares and printers, as I said, like the 3D printers, with which the users can imagine, can create, can design, can develop things, can create models, and so on and so forth. So this is something which is a departure from the past, and there are more and more libraries getting into these kind of activities, thereby creating spaces which I said are for that go beyond the typical learning or consumption of information, but then creating and providing spaces for creating and providing spaces for having experiences. So this is something that we already are seeing, and in the future we would see more and more such things happening in libraries. Now, technical developments or technological developments are not the only factors, or not the only factor that has impacted academic library service delivery. Although that is the most commonly discussed factor, that is certainly the most dominant factor. As all of us know, the technological or the technology influenced or impacted changes that has happened in libraries is very huge. But then, as I said, that alone is not the only factor. Today, the evolving shape of the pedagogy in higher education has been one of the key reasons for the change in the shape of academic libraries. Students are now to study in many different ways, and the role which the library plans in this is evident with a shift away from places which were traditionally silent study areas to become flexible and dynamic spaces which are suited to social and group learning. So what is being talked about here is that there was a time when the users would walk into the library, go to a table, leave their notes and pen, pick up a book, sit there, read, make notes, and then read more, and then leave the library. So there has been a definitive change from that. And that is not just because of the technological developments, but also because of the way how the education is now changing. And there is talk about the blended learning, which draws on both the physical and virtual spaces, the physical spaces in the library to the virtual spaces where one can sit in the comforts of one's home or wherever and undergo the process of learning or have their education. This is very typical of what institutions like IGNOU has been doing. And in fact, in the recent months, the pandemic, the ongoing pandemic, the COVID-19 pandemic has in fact, as all of you know, has brought about certain transformations, some certain transformative changes. Education has suddenly moved to a virtual environment. Now, when it has moved to a virtual environment, the teaching and learning process, which were largely within the confines of classroom or offered from brick and mortar buildings, have now shifted to the comforts of one's homes. So the electronic learning or the virtual learning or the online learning, whatever we call, should be supplemented or should be supported by services also in a virtual or online manner. And libraries are again expected to support the new methods of the teaching and learning process. So this is an example where the factor that has influenced or impacted the change has been the change in the very teaching and learning process. So the teaching and learning process undergoing this change or undergoing this shift has impacted the libraries, especially the academic libraries, in its way of rendering or providing services. Also, we see the rise of things like open access. So today information or the users want barrier-free access to information. So when we say barrier-free access, it should be technology, the barriers that can arise from technological limitations, or it can be the barriers because of the price or the cost of materials. And this second aspect which I said, which is, or the reason which I said, which is the lack of access to content because it is priced or because it is behind paywall, is now an increasing area of concern. It is understood that the research output, usually the research papers, which emanate from the research work which are carried out in laboratories and which are funded, largely funded by the public money, this information should be available openly to users. So open access has again become a movement, and libraries across the world are driving the open access movement. So library is one of the major stakeholders. Of course, there is a publishing industry, there is a research community, and apart from that, and others of course, but then libraries are also one of the important players in the open access movement, which aims at providing barrier-free access to information. So this is again something that has come up in the last couple of decades and which is gaining momentum, and which is likely to become more and more important in the academic and research landscape, and where libraries will have a very important role to play. Research data management is yet another area which is becoming very important in libraries in the recent times. So like research papers, research data is the data that is obtained or that is generated during the process of research. Now, this data can be collected from surveys, or it can be an outcome of experiments. So, there are different ways in which the data is generated, and the understanding is that the research data which forms the basis for the research papers, or which forms the basis for analysis, should be openly available to all. The research data should be openly available to all. What has been happening in the past is that usually the research data is not available in the open. Usually the institution or the researcher who does the research is the custodian of that data, and after whatever research has been done or whatever analysis has been done by that researcher, the data remains invisible and unused. So from a departure from that what has been happening, increasingly governments and institutions all over the world have realized that making this data open will be very beneficial, as other researchers can also analyze this data. Of course, there are several other advantages and benefits of making the research data open, but then one of the key expectation is that once the research data becomes open, it gives opportunity to researchers from across the world to analyze this data in the ways and means that a researcher would want. So avoiding duplication of data, looking at reproducibility. So there are several aspects, but then for now what we need to know is that this is also something that is going to become very important in the next few years, and where libraries will play a very important role. In fact, there have been talk about having robots in the libraries. We have seen the use of robots in industries and in many sectors. So today there is a talk of robots in the libraries. So this is again something that is futuristic. So when you talk about open access or research data, this is something that has begun to happen, and this will for sure become very important in the next decade or so. But when you talk about something like robots in libraries, this is also a good to have technology. It might be useful. There are some libraries which have experimented and put robots in libraries that greet people, can answer some certain questions. So these are also talked about as future when one talks about the future of libraries. But then some of these would also involve a lot of money, a lot of revenue that needs to be that will be required to have these technologies, and some of these things that we imagine today or that we talk of today might just make a brief appearance, and it may not sustain over a long period of time. So we have seen various technologies entering libraries. Several technology. We have seen the barcode technology, we have seen the RFID technology, and several such technologies being adopted by the libraries. Some technologies have been there in the libraries for a long period of time. Some technologies, they appear and they are there for a, and then this is true for technologies not just with libraries, but that's very commonly seen how technologies evolve over a period of time. So, as technologies evolve, it also becomes more and more integrated with society, and we see smart appliances, the voice controlled assistants. So these are also now technologies that are impacting people's lives. Now, how these technologies can help libraries, because libraries have been adapting to accommodate new applications and technologies for learning, research, and provisioning information. So all this have been happening, but then as new technologies appear, how these are going to be innovatively and effectively adopted in libraries will also become important. Now, so to conclude, I would say that to look at the future, we need to be in touch with the present, and the future of libraries is to a large extent dependent or on the technologies that evolve. And as Mahatma Gandhi said, I will end with his quote. He said that the future depends on what you do today. So clearly, what we are doing in libraries today is that we are adopting more technology. We are adapting to the various the teaching pedagogy. We are in touch with the information seeking habits of the users, which are again undergoing change. So the future of libraries is definitely going to be digital, but that doesn't mean that print is going to get wiped off anytime soon. It would be there for quite some time. Like we talked about blended learning, where we are talking about both the virtual environment as well as the classroom environment of learning. So similarly, at least for some time in the future, the traditional and the virtual libraries would coexist, and what we would see are the hybrid libraries, at least for the coming couple of decades, 2 or 3 decades at least. So that will be all for this course, talking about future of libraries. But then I would live with a note where future is a high. When you talk about future, it is very perspective oriented. So there is a lot of literature that is available on the internet, where different authors have spoken about the future of libraries in different ways. So on that note, I end this topic on the future of libraries. Thank you.